Greystone was a quiet place before the grief came. For centuries it lay cradled by gentle hills, half forgotten and content. Villagers told stories of strange lights flickering on moonless nights, of vanished children lost at the forest's edge. They whispered of the Hollow King as if saying it too often might summon it. Beneath the town's oldest hill, buried under layers of rock and root, a carved stone threshold slumbered. It was a seed planted by something beyond our world, an interdimensional doorway waiting for its time. For eons that threshold gathered darkness. Its silent hunger pulsed in feverish dreams far away, drawing breath from the farthest stars. In those twilight depths it had many names, the Hollow King, the Gaping Spectre, the Void Man, but its true name was beyond mortal tongue. In its presence, the very laws of nature faltered and time itself seemed to melt. On the night the barrier thinned, every dreamer in Greystone stirred simultaneously. The ground shuddered beneath the skin of the earth. Children saw silent shapes roaming outside their windows, travelers vanished into fog-blot horizons. The air grew heavy with dread, as if reality had been torn and something unspeakable had seeped through. Village lamps guttered out one by one, and the stars overhead blinked in impossible patterns, as if constellations were convulsing with fear. Whispers filled the night with static, a broken dissonance louder than humanity, chanting in a language only the soul understood. By dawn, everything had changed. Those who survived awoke to a world that could never be the same. The pale morning light fell on empty streets and hollow-eyed corpses perched like statues. Time's river ran black and slow, memories warped. Even the sun was out of place, drifting across the sky at a reckless angle. Greystone had become the seedbed of something monstrous, the ground zero of an ancient dark reborn. The Hollow King had taken root, and all the world would soon be his. Arthur Pendleton had always been drawn to mysteries, but the sight of Greystone that morning chilled his blood. The sun, thin and jaundiced, hung crooked in an orange sky, and the once bustling village lay empty and silent. Doors swung open on their hinges, windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Arthur's boots crunched on broken glass and withered flowers as he walked through the deserted streets. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and a low, humming whisper danced through the pines around the town, though there was no breeze. He had heard rumors of strange things in Greystone, of course. Now he understood them all too clearly. In the center of town, the old chapel bell still hung inert in its frame, and the clock in the tower had stopped dead at 3:13. Even the birds sat motionless on their perches, and the world felt paused. Arthur approached the hill at the town's edge where the stone door was said to lie buried. Broken chunks of earth spilled out of a cracked entrance. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The inside was unlike any cave he had ever entered. The rock walls pulsed as if alive, black veins drifting across them. Arthur's head swam with colors he could not name, green like mold, purple like bruises, and a sickly luminescence that didn't belong in nature. The drip of water sounded like distant screams. Somewhere above him, bone-white roots curled from the ceiling and fell on the floor. Each breath tasted faintly metallic, as if the air itself bled iron. The silence was complete but for the thump of Arthur's own heart. He lit a torch, hands trembling. In the flickering light, he saw it, the old threshold, a strange carved door etched with impossible symbols, now wide open like a maw. The hinges had rusted away. Through it lay black nothingness. Arthur felt its pull deep in his bones, an ancient longing. The whispers grew louder now, forming words he should not understand. They crawled into his mind and filled his thoughts with images of sprawling voids and cities made of bone. He staggered forward, feet seemingly moving of their own accord. Inside, the geometry of space warped around him. Passages lengthened and narrowed by the act of looking at them. Sometimes the door vanished behind him, then it would reappear where it shouldn't be, leading him deeper. Arthur felt his sense of time dissolve, seconds stretched into hours, then snapped. His tongue twisted to articulate shapes no human mouth should form, his eyes welled with hot tears that were cold to the touch. A low, Scratching sound echoed from somewhere deep in the darkness, but whenever he turned, there was nothing but shadows hunched in corners. Suddenly, Arthur's reflection shimmered in a pool of stagnant water at his feet. He blinked, and the reflection blinked back in delay. His features had changed, his skin gone pallid, eyes empty hollows of darkness. A slow panic rose in his chest. He tried to turn away, but a sticky hand gripped his shoulder. Whose hand was that? He spun, there was no one. He was completely alone. In that moment, the drip-drip of the water froze. The torch guttered and died. In the blackness, a voice answered him, "Welcome home." By the next morning, the fog had crept into the streets of Greystone. A pallid, oily mist drifted from the edges of town toward its heart. Hannah Caldwell, the town schoolteacher, hurried to her front porch with trembling hands to survey the scene. The sky above was leaden gray, bleached of sun, and the air felt charged with a silent dread. Where the hills once watched over Greystone peacefully, now ghosts of mist clawed down their slopes. Hannah shivered, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Inside the small general store, Carl Finley flipped on the radio for any news. Static and crackles met him instead of music. The announcer's voice broke in between blasts of white noise, warbling and distant, something about whiteout conditions, and warnings nobody understood. Carl looked out the window, clouds of mist coiled around the lamp posts, slowly engulfing them. He saw Mrs. Larkin, the old widow who ran the diner, step outside and then vanish like a wisp into the fog. A chill ran down his spine. The world outside was changing, and no one could say how or why. On the street, teenagers fled their homes, eyes wild. The local high school had been abandoned almost overnight, chalk still marked empty blackboards and homework lay forgotten on desks. Families barricaded windows and braced doors, piling furniture against the frames. No one wanted to be the next withered figure caught on the news, a ghostly man, wandering blindly in endless gray. Children clung to their parents, whispering prayers to gods they had forgotten. Grace, a little girl in a pink coat, pressed her face to the window and pointed. "Look, Mama, it's alive." Outside, in the swirling haze, shadowed forms hunched and dragged twisted limbs across the road, as if the very earth were crawling to escape. By midday, the telephones had stopped working. The world outside Greystone was out of reach, no messages could come in or go out. Mayor Dawson paced in his ruined office, slumping to his desk as the reality sank in, there would be no cavalry arriving. Outside the window, distant headlights flickered on the road like dying fireflies, swallowed quickly by the gray breath. One car after another became lost, drivers wandered out in confusion or disappeared into the mist. The town's generator hummed and sputtered until it died, plunging the streets into a flickering twilight of failing candles. On every block, people gathered in small clusters, haunted by fear. They spoke in hushed, trembling voices, afraid to disturb the terrible quiet. Horror was everywhere, lamps no longer burned, food rotted in hours, and clocks all stopped telling time. On the steps of the church, strangers huddled and shared their nightmares of shapes in the fog. The doctor reported that those who inhaled too deeply began to swell and wither, their flesh melting like wax. Even the living showed madness in their eyes, hollow wells that stared at nothing. Somewhere, a dog howled and died, its last sound muffled by the creeping gray. Hollow ones, those whisper nightmares never named, walked openly now. John, the baker, was the first to see them, silhouettes at the edge of his porch, bodies hunched and skin translucent. He blinked, and they were gone, but late that night, scratching came at the window, nails clawing against the glass. Soon every home reported missing pets and smeared claw marks. Children cried and wet themselves with fear. In the streets, packs of hollowed ones prowled, ragged shapes with empty faces, arms reaching out in longing. Everyone knew then that there was nowhere to hide. Even the concept of memory began to fray. Grandmother Marjorie, rocking in her creaky chair, suddenly forgot the word for water, and closed her mouth to her parched lips. When the sun finally set, it did not rise again. Days blurred into nights, months into moments. The fog pressed on relentlessly, as if the earth were breathing its final breath. Far beyond the hills, a distant hum rippled through everything, a single terrible song. It was the Hollow King's voice, calling all things home. Beyond the hills of Greystone, the world recoiled in horror. Other towns and cities felt the chill breath of the fog as it spread like a plague. News footage flickered on screens far away, empty highways shrouded in mist, abandoned cars idling on deserted bridges, traffic lights blinking out at random. A weather satellite showed a pale gray swirl growing over a continent. Officials in foreign offices watched in mute terror as communications sputtered and the ghostly fog drifted across borders. Everywhere it touched, civilization began to buckle. In the capital cities, governments convulsed. Emergency briefing rooms emptied into panic when the first military units sent to investigate never returned. Fighter jets scrambled up through the low clouds, then fell silent, the last blip on the radar inched toward Greystone before cutting off. The president's TV address was cut short when his eyes unfocused and he stared silently into nothing. Stock markets crashed in a heartbeat, any pretense of order dissolving into chaos. Downtown districts stood abandoned in deadly calm, half-lit neon signs and shattered glass, supermarket aisles still stocked with food nobody could eat. Factories ground to a halt as the power grid flickered and died. The fog seemed to devour electricity itself. Lights sputtered out, motors stuttered and died, and computers wheezed into black silence. Even the internet began to unravel, messages twisted into illegible gibberish, websites looping static. Trains and tunnels lurched inexplicably off their tracks. In some cities, gravity wavered for a moment, sending people crashing to the ground like puppets with cut strings. Satellite sensors detected impossible readings, strange compounds of unknown elements, fragments of other worlds imprinted on the sky. Across the globe, faiths crumbled under the weight of truth. The idea that humanity mattered felt like a cosmic joke. Scientists stared blankly at their instruments as mathematical certainties dissolved into gibberish. Priests fell silent, for their sacred texts offered no comfort here. Ordinary people went numb. Communities gathered only to watch each other in dread, recognizing the same finality in every face. Children stopped laughing because they didn't remember how. Elders sat rocking in place, whispering prayers to dead gods who could not answer. Even memory itself betrayed them. Journalists who had covered wars and disasters found themselves unable to recall their own names. Photographs and letters rearranged themselves overnight, writing and faces shifting into stranger, mocking versions. Calendars lost their days, one morning might follow another with no sense of time passing. A man picked up a photograph of himself as a boy, but the image stared back at him with a twisted grin instead. Streets and cities erased themselves as if they had only been chalk drawings in the rain. Reality had become a thin, laughing lie. The world's last survivors did not perish in grand explosions. They simply faded away in hushed solitude, crumbling in their homes or collapsing on empty streets as if into eternal sleep. The sky held no sunset or sunrise, only an endless twilight of bruised orange and purple. By then no voice remained on earth. Far above the broken planet, something else had fully awakened. The Hollow King, that ancient interdimensional void, coalesced beyond all laws of form. A shifting cathedral of impossible geometry unfolded across the sky, weaving nightmares into being. At its center hung a shape that was everything and nothing at once, the void itself. All that remained on Earth was the quicksilver edge of dawn that would never fully break. In the ruined streets, the final survivors groped at empty air. The city's steel giants twisted into impossible angles, highways writhed as if alive, snarling around abandoned vehicles. In one shattered office, an old man pressed his hands to his temples and felt the world unravel, the bones of buildings creaking as they collapsed into nothingness. His reflection in the broken glass held only darkness behind hollow eyes. Then the sky itself began to bleed. Neon signs above storefronts flared and exploded, painting the clouds in burning letters that spelled impossibly long words in a language of limbs and stars. Cloud patterns twisted into spirals of living black, and a bruised purple light poured down like ink across the landscape. The bodies of those remaining convulsed violently. In a parking lot, a young woman's joints bent grotesquely as something like a black vine crawled from her mouth and writhed on the asphalt. Every living creature and withered plant screamed inwardly. There was no air to hear it, before it vanished. Reality finally buckled under the weight of the Hollow King's presence. In that breaking of worlds, the last mind still conscious perceived another sky beyond the one they had known, an infinite expanse of void spangled with unfamiliar constellations, and at its center, a yawning impossible geometry. Stars twisted into triple helixes and fractal patterns that defied reason. For the first time since the world began, those survivors sensed the sheer vastness of the cosmos, how minuscule, how utterly insignificant they were. In that nihilistic truth lay the final dagger of despair. Somewhere, far beyond the comprehension of the last human minds, the Hollow King took its final form. It had no name, a cathedral of nightmares, fractal and infinite. Spires and limbs spun outward from its central void, jaws agape in an endless silent song, and eyes that were galaxies forming and collapsing in an instant. The planet shuddered as if trying to shrink away, but instead was slowly absorbed into the formless belly of that eldritch cathedral. Gravity tore like paper, light and sound frayed at the edges, and even the notion of being was unwoven thread by thread. In those final moments, the earth itself unraveled. Cities of stone and steel turned to dust that glittered and fell, mixing with oceans that boiled away into nothing. Continents crumpled like old paper maps, folding into a single shimmering point. Every human story, hopes, regrets, lullabies, curses, was reduced to a faint echo, then silence. Memories dimmed in the collapsing minds of survivors, until all that remained was blank infinity. And then, with a vastness beyond imagining, even that point vanished. There was no light, no sound, no dimension, nothing recognizable remained. The last breath of the universe exhaled into darkness. In that boundless void, the Hollow King waited at the center of all, a presence unbound and eternal. Above the void, a final image lingered for an instant, an endless cathedral of geometric decay, every line and color spiraling into oblivion. It was at once magnificent and dreadful, the Hollow King's ultimate form, present yet beyond vision, a shape not of substance but of pure abstraction. For a heartbeat, all that ever was could be seen at once, every sunrise, every laughter, every tear, nothing spared. And in that eternal flash there was only one truth, everything was dust, and the void had come home.